The woman in seat 2A was a masterpiece of concealment. Flying first class from Geneva to New York, she was draped in a cream-colored cashmere sweater, its sleeves pulled deliberately over her wrists. She smiled politely, accepted a glass of water, and gazed out the window at the clouds. But beneath the expensive fabric and practiced calm, her body was a roadmap of her husband's rage. A deep purple bruise bloomed on her forearm, a secret she guarded with every breath. She never imagined the man in seat 2B, a quiet CEO buried in financial reports, would be the one to notice. And she certainly never imagined he would do more than just notice. He would stand up and bring her gilded cage crashing down. The hum of the Boeing 777 was a monotonous lullaby, a sound that should have been soothing, but only served to amplify the frantic beating of Rachel Payne's heart. She clutched the armrest, her knuckles white, as the aircraft leveled out over the Atlantic. Every shift of her body was a calculated negotiation with Payne. The bruise on her arm was the most obvious, a dark, ugly plum shade that peeked out if she wasn't careful. But it was the tender ache in her ribs, a gift from 2 nights ago, that made each breath a shallow, cautious affair. She was 6 months pregnant. The baby, a tiny, innocent passenger within her, was the only reason she was on this flight, the only reason she endured. Her husband, Justin Murphy, had insisted. "It's the Bainbridge Gala, Rachel. My biggest client. You have to be there. You have to look perfect." Perfection was Justin's obsession. He was a senior partner at Ethelred Capital, a venture capital firm that devoured promising startups and spat out billionaires. His public image was meticulously crafted, the brilliant deal maker, the devoted husband, the future titan of industry. He wore bespoke suits from Savile Row. His watch was a Patek Philippe, and his wife was his most prized accessory. Rachel, a former architect with a portfolio of award-winning minimalist designs, was intelligent, beautiful, and most importantly compliant. The bruise had been an accident, he'd claimed. A flash of anger after a deal went south. He'd grabbed her arm too hard as she'd tried to walk away from his tirade. "You know how stressed I am, darling," he had cooed afterward, his voice a silken apology, as he traced the outline of the swelling with a cold finger. "I would never hurt you, or our little one." The lie was as familiar as the fear that followed. The man beside her in seat 2B hadn't spoken a word since they boarded. He was older, perhaps in his late 40s, with salt and pepper hair, and a face etched with the kind of fatigue that came from boardrooms, not bar fights. He wore a simple navy blazer, no tie, and had an air of quiet authority. He'd opened his laptop before takeoff and had been immersed in spreadsheets and reports ever since. His name, she'd briefly noted from his boarding pass, was Declan Shaw. Rachel adjusted her cashmere wrap, a suffocatingly soft shield. She tried to read a novel, but the words swam before her eyes. Instead, she found herself studying her neighbor. He wasn't classically handsome like Justin, whose chiseled features graced the pages of financial magazines. This man's face was more rugged, lined with thought. His focus was absolute. He moved with an economy of motion that suggested immense self-control. A flight attendant, a warm woman named Maria, came by to offer drinks. "Mrs. Murphy." "Some champagne to celebrate your journey." Rachel forced a smile. "Just sparkling water, thank you, Maria. For 2. She patted her stomach gently. Maria beamed. "Of course." And for you, Sir Declan Shaw looked up from his screen, his blue eyes startlingly direct. "The same, please." "Thank you." He gave Maria a genuine, unhurried smile that made her blush slightly. Then his gaze flickered to Rachel. It was a brief professional glance, but in that split second, she felt an unnerving sense of being truly seen. Not as an accessory, not as a vessel for a baby, but as a person. It was so foreign that it felt like a physical touch, and she instinctively recoiled, pulling her wrap tighter. Later, reaching for her water glass, the sleeve of her sweater snagged on the armrest's metal clasp. It pulled back just an inch, no more. But in the curated light of the first-class cabin, it was enough. The deepest, darkest part of the bruise was exposed for a fleeting moment. A constellation of black, blue, and violent purple on her pale skin. She fixed it instantly, her movements a frantic blur. She smoothed the cashmere down her heart, hammering against her bruised ribs. She risked a glance at the man beside her. He was still looking at his laptop, his expression unchanged. He hadn't noticed. The relief was so profound, it made her dizzy. She leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes, and prayed for the anonymity of the sky to hold for another 7 hours. But Declan Shaw had noticed. He hadn't moved a muscle. His gaze hadn't wavered from the quarterly logistics report on his screen. But he had seen it. He was the COO of Apex Global Logistics, a company built on precision observation and seeing the details others missed. A misplaced container, a delayed shipment, a flash of purple on a terrified woman's arm, it was all data. And the data he had just collected sent a cold, familiar dread seeping into his bones. He kept typing his face, a mask of corporate indifference, but inside a different kind of calculation had already begun. An hour passed in sterile silence. Lunch was served on crisp white linen poached salmon, for her a steak for him. Rachel picked at her food, the nausea having less to do with her pregnancy and more to do with the gnawing anxiety in her gut. She could feel Declan Shaw's presence beside her, a quiet, gravitational pull she couldn't ignore. He wasn't looking at her, but the sheer force of his stillness felt like scrutiny. Finally, he closed his laptop with a soft click. He turned to her, his expression mild, almost academic. "That's a beautiful rap," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone. Cashmere Rachel was startled by the direct address. It was a simple pleasantry, yet it felt like an interrogation. "Oh, yes, thank you. It was a gift from my husband." She heard the slight tremor in her own voice and hated it. She was trained to be poised to be Justin's perfect echo. "He has good taste," Declan said, his gaze lingering on the cream-colored fabric. "My sister loves cashmere. Says it's like wearing a cloud. But it's delicate, isn't it? Snags easily." The word snags hung in the air between them. It was a test. He was telling her without saying it that he had seen. Panic flared in Rachel's chest, hot and sharp. The rules were simple: deny, deflect, disappear. "I suppose so," she said, her voice cooler now, more distant. She turned to look out the window, a clear dismissal. "I'm not usually so clumsy." He didn't push. He simply nodded and took a sip of his water. "My apologies for bothering you. Long flights make me restless." The conversation should have ended there. But a few minutes later, as turbulence gently rocked the plane, Rachel's book slipped from her lap and fell to the floor. Before she could even bend down, a movement that would have sent a lance of pain through her ribs, Declan had smoothly unbuckled his seatbelt, retrieved it, and placed it back on her tray table. "There you go," he said. His fingers didn't brush hers, but the kindness of the gesture was disarming. "Thank you," she murmured, flustered. "Not at all," he replied, settling back into his seat. "We have to look out for each other up here." He paused, then added, "My company Apex. We ship everything from medical supplies to priceless art. The one rule I drill into my team is that the value isn't in the object itself, but in its safe arrival. You have to handle the fragile things with the most care." His eyes met hers, and this time there was no mistaking the meaning. He wasn't talking about logistics anymore. He was talking about her, about the faint shadow of a fingerprint-shaped bruise she knew was darkening on her jaw expertly concealed with foundation, about the baby she was carrying. He was speaking in a language of metaphor, giving her an opening, a safe space to respond if she dared. She wanted to. A desperate, primal scream was trapped in her throat. "Help me," it wanted to howl. "He's a monster. He hurts me. He's going to kill me one day." But Justin's voice was louder, a permanent resident in her mind. "Don't you ever embarrass me, Rachel. Don't you ever make a scene. Our life is perfect. Tell them how perfect it is." So she smiled, a brittle, perfect smile. "That's a wonderful philosophy. My husband's business is similar in a way. Venture capital. He finds promising young companies and protects them, helps them grow." The words tasted like ash. She was defending her jailer, polishing the bars of her own cage. Declan's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something disappointment perhaps crossed his eyes before being extinguished. "Justin Murphy at Ethelred Capital. Yes, I'm familiar with his work. He's making quite a name for himself. Very aggressive, very successful." The way he said aggressive sent a chill down her spine. To the world it was a compliment, a sign of a killer instinct in business. To Rachel it was a synonym for the man who broke a lamp over a misplaced file, the man who whispered threats that sounded like love songs. "Yes," she said, quietly. "He's very dedicated." Declan leaned back, steepling his fingers. He seemed to be studying the cabin ceiling. "Dedication is admirable. But I've always believed a man's true character isn't revealed in the boardroom. It's in how he treats those he has power over. His employees, his family." He looked at her again, his voice dropping slightly. "It's in how he handles the things he claims to protect." The mask was slipping. This wasn't a stranger making small talk. This was a man sending a targeted message. He knew. He somehow knew. Rachel's carefully constructed world, the one where she pretended the bruises were from bumping into furniture, and the fear was just pregnancy hormones was beginning to fracture. She felt a terrifying, exhilarating sliver of hope. It was the most dangerous feeling she'd had in years. Before she could think of a response, a chime sounded, and the captain's voice announced their initial descent toward the North American coastline. The conversation was over. But for the first time, Rachel realized she wasn't alone in the sky. Someone else had seen the storm raging beneath the calm surface. The question was, what could he possibly do about it? As the plane continued its slow descent, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The spell of suspended time was broken. Passengers began to stir, gathering their belongings, the low hum of conversation rising. For Rachel, the proximity to New York meant proximity to Justin. Her brief, fragile sense of hope began to dissolve, replaced by the familiar, cold dread. Justin would be waiting for her at the airport. He always did, a public display of the doting husband. He'd kiss her, take her bag, and whisper in her ear. "Did you behave? Did you tell everyone how lucky you are?" Her phone, which she'd kept on airplane mode, buzzed as it connected to a satellite network. She had switched it on to message Justin, their arrival time, a required ritual. A stream of notifications flooded the screen, but one in particular made her blood run cold. A video call from Justin. It was unscheduled, unapproved, a violation of the unspoken rules of his control. He never called when she was in public, unless he was angry or suspicious. Her hands trembled as she fumbled to answer it. She angled the phone so Declan couldn't see the screen, her body instinctively curling inward to shield the conversation. "Hello, darling," she said, her voice a strained whisper. Justin's face filled the screen. He was in his home office, the one she had designed to be a sanctuary of light and clean lines. On him, it looked like a predator's lair. He wasn't smiling. "Rachel, where have you been?" His voice was dangerously soft. "On the plane. Justin. Like we planned. We're about to land. Don't play games with me. I messaged you an hour ago. You didn't respond. My phone was off. I was reading. A lie." She had been too paralyzed with anxiety to do anything. "Reading," he scoffed. "I hope you weren't bothering the person next to you with your dramatics. You know how you get." It was a threat disguised as concern, a reminder of the times he'd accused her of being unstable, of imagining his cruelty. She glanced nervously at Declan. He appeared to be engrossed in a magazine, oblivious. "No, of course not," she whispered, desperate to end the call. "I've just been resting." "Good," Justin purred, his eyes narrowing. "Because I have a surprise for you. My meeting was pushed. I'm coming to New York a day early. I'll be waiting for you when you land." The air rushed from Rachel's lungs. She had been clinging to the fantasy of one night alone in their apartment, a few hours to breathe before he arrived, a few hours to let the mask slip. Oh, she managed. "That's wonderful, isn't it?" His smile was a slash of white teeth. It didn't reach his cold, assessing eyes. "Now I need you to do something for me. The portfolio for the Chen acquisition, it's in my briefcase. The blue leather one. I need you to go over the final projections before the gala tomorrow. There can be no mistakes. You remember what happens when there are mistakes, don't you, Rachel?" The question was a physical blow. He was referencing the incident with her ribs. She had miscalculated a currency conversion on a minor account, a tiny error that had cost him nothing but his temper. Suddenly, her phone slipped from her trembling hand. It clattered onto the small table between her seat and Declan's landing screen up. In her panic, she had accidentally hit the speakerphone button. Justin's voice, now tinny and amplified, filled the small space. "Perfect. Every detail. If you embarrass me in front of Robert Bainbridge, I swear to God you'll regret it for a month. Do you understand me? You are my wife. You will reflect my success. Nod if you understand." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel stared in horror at the phone, at Justin's snarling face frozen on the screen. She saw Declan slowly lower his magazine. He didn't look at her. He looked at the phone, his expression unreadable, carved from stone. He had heard. He had heard everything. Rachel snatched the phone, her fingers fumbling to end the call. She jammed it into her purse, her face burning with a shame so profound it was suffocating. The carefully constructed facade hadn't just cracked. It had been blown to pieces. She was exposed, her humiliation laid bare in the filtered air of first class. She risked a look at Declan. He was no longer pretending to be occupied. He was looking directly at her, and the mild curiosity was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by something else, something harder and much more dangerous. It was cold, righteous anger. He leaned toward her, his voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through her panic like a surgeon's scalpel. "Rachel," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "When we land, you are not going with him." It wasn't a question. It was a command. And in the wreckage of her humiliation, that simple declarative statement sounded like the beginning of a revolution. The plane's wheels screeched against the tarmac at JFK, a sound that signaled the end of Rachel's temporary asylum. The seatbelt sign pinged off. The familiar choreography of arrival began around them, the clicking of buckles, the rustle of jackets, the opening of overhead bins. For Rachel, each sound was a tick of a clock, counting down to her reunion with Justin. His voice from the phone echoed in her ears. "You'll regret it for a month." She was frozen, paralyzed by the collision of two impossible realities. One was the life she knew, a suffocating cycle of fear and appeasement with Justin. The other was the quiet, resolute man beside her, a complete stranger who had just witnessed her deepest shame and had not recoiled in discomfort, but had leaned in with an offer that was both terrifying and unbelievable. Declan didn't move to get his bag. He waited, giving her space, his calm a stark contrast to her internal chaos. When she finally turned to face him, her eyes wide with panic, he spoke again, his voice low and urgent. "He has no real power over you, Rachel. Men like him, their power is built on illusion, on silence, on the belief that their victims have no other options. You don't understand," she whispered the words catching in her throat. "He's everything. He controls the money, the apartment, my visa. I'm a Russian citizen. My green card is conditional tied to him. If I leave, I have nothing. I have nowhere to go. I could be deported." She hugged her stomach protectively. "And the baby?" Declan's gaze softened with empathy, but lost none of its steel. "I understand more than you think," he said. "I have a sister. Her ex-husband was a man just like Justin. Charming, successful, and a monster behind closed doors. I learned a long time ago that you don't fight monsters like that with sentiment. You fight them with leverage." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear over the cabin announcements. "Ethelred Capital, your husband's firm is in the final stages of a hostile takeover of a logistics software company called Logicor Tech. It's the deal that's supposed to make Justin a legend, the youngest rainmaker in the firm's history. It's worth about $900 million. Rachel stared at him confused. She knew about the deal. Justin had been obsessed with it for months. It was the source of his stress, the excuse for his escalating rage. Declan continued, his words precise and devastating. Logicor Tech's biggest client, the one that accounts for 60% of their annual revenue, is my company, Apex Global Logistics. Our contract is up for renewal in 2 weeks. It has a change of control clause. If the ownership of Logicor changes in a way we deem unfavorable to our interests, I can terminate the contract immediately, with no penalty." The pieces began to click into place in Rachel's mind, forming a picture so audacious she could barely comprehend it. "If I pull my contract," Declan explained, his eyes locked on hers, "the valuation of Logicor plummets by more than half. The deal collapses. The investors will pull out. Ethelred will lose hundreds of millions, and the man who spearheaded the deal, your husband, will be ruined. His reputation, his career, everything he has built his entire identity on will be annihilated overnight." It was breathtaking. It wasn't a vague promise of help. It was a tactical nuclear weapon aimed directly at the heart of Justin's universe. Why she breathed. "Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." For the first time, a flicker of raw emotion crossed Declan's face. It was the memory of a pain, not his own. "Because my sister waited too long. She thought no one could help her, that he was too powerful. By the time she finally got out, the scars were so deep. I made a promise to myself then. Never again. Not if I could help it. Not on my watch." The line of passengers began to move. They had only seconds left. "Here is my offer." Declan said, his focus absolute. "When we walk out of this gate, my head of security will be waiting. His name is Frank. He's a former Secret Service agent. You will walk with him. He will take you to a secure private residence. A team of the best immigration and divorce lawyers in New York will meet you there tomorrow morning. We will start the process of getting you a U visa for victims of crime, securing your residency, and filing for an emergency protective order." He handed her a simple black business card. It said only his name and a private phone number. Or he said, his gaze unflinching, "You can walk out of that gate and go to your husband, and I will sit back and approve the Logicor deal. I won't interfere. I will let him have his victory. He was giving her the choice. He was not a savior swooping in to carry her away. He was offering her a weapon and asking if she had the courage to pull the trigger. The life she knew, however horrific, was familiar. This path was a leap into a terrifying, unknown void. But it was a chance, the only one she might ever get. "We're here, Mr. Shaw," the flight attendant said, smiling at them. It was time. Declan stood up, pulling his carry-on from the overhead compartment. He didn't look at her. The choice was hers and hers alone. Rachel took a deep, shuddering breath, the air stinging her bruised ribs. She looked at the business card in her hand. Then she thought of the child kicking softly inside her. She would not raise her baby in a house of fear. She would not teach her daughter or son that love came with pain. Slowly, deliberately, she pushed herself to her feet. She clutched the business card so tightly its edges dug into her palm. Her heart was a frantic drum, but her mind, for the first time in years, was crystal clear. She had made her decision. The jet bridge was a sterile, narrow tube, a limbo between the sky and the life that waited for her on the ground. Each step Rachel took on the slightly bouncy floor echoed the frantic, unsteady rhythm of her own heart. The air was stale thick with the scent of jet fuel and the collective weariness of travel. Declan walked a pace ahead of her, a silent, unmovable object, carving a path through the disembarking crowd. He didn't look back. A gesture she understood was a sign of profound respect. He had given her the weapon. The choice to use it remained entirely hers. Her right hand was shoved deep into her coat pocket, her fingers wrapped so tightly around the sharp corners of his business card that she could feel its imprint on her palm. It was her only anchor in a sea of terrifying possibilities. With every step, Justin's voice echoed in her mind, a cruel phantom whispering of consequences. "You are nothing without me. Don't you ever embarrass me." She felt a familiar, sickening wave of fear. It would be so easy to fall back into line, to play the part of the grateful wife, to smooth over the cracks and pretend. It was a role she knew by heart. But then she felt a soft, fluttering kick from within, a tiny, insistent reminder of the life that was depending on her. This wasn't just about her survival anymore. It was about her child's right to be born into a world without fear. The thought solidified into a sliver of steel in her spine. They emerged from the tunnel into the blinding lights and chaotic symphony of the International Arrivals Hall at John F. Kennedy Airport. The vast space was a churning ocean of people families, embracing drivers, holding signs, the cacophony of a dozen languages mingling under the high ceilings. It was a place of joyous reunions, but for Rachel it felt like an arena. And she knew the gladiator was waiting. Then she saw him. He was standing just beyond the customs exit, perfectly positioned for the best view. Justin Murphy in all his curated glory. He wore a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit that made him look like a king surveying his domain. His dark hair was perfect. His smile was dazzling, and in his hand he held a single, long-stemmed white rose. To the hundreds of strangers rushing past, he was a portrait of devotion, the kind of husband women dreamed of. Rachel's stomach clenched into a cold, hard knot. She saw not the man, but the mask. Not the rose, but the thorns on its stem. His eyes scanned the crowd and found her instantly. His smile widened a public declaration of ownership. But she saw the flicker of annoyance in his gaze as he registered the tall, imposing man walking beside her. He had expected her to be alone, vulnerable, ready to be gathered back into his control. This was it. The precipice. Declan stopped just before they reached the waiting crowd, turning to face her. In the same moment, a man detached himself from a nearby pillar and stood beside him, He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the quiet, watchful eyes of someone who sees everything and says little. His movements were economical, his presence a wall of calm capability. This was Frank. Rachel Declan said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the surrounding chaos. This is your final choice. Once you walk past this point, there is no turning back. Justin was already moving towards them, his stride long and confident, the smile still plastered on his face. Rachel, darling, there you are. His voice was a rich, welcoming baritone, a beautiful lie broadcast for the world to hear. He completely ignored Declan, his eyes locked on Rachel, reasserting his dominance. I was beginning to worry. He reached for her arm, the one with the bruise hidden beneath layers of cashmere and wool. It was his signature move, a gesture that looked like an endearment, but was always a brand. His fingers were about to close around her bicep when she reacted. It wasn't a decision. It was a primal, physical rejection. She flinched backward, pulling her arm away with a small, sharp movement that was as shocking and loud as a slap in the cavernous hall. Justin's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went dead cold. The mask had slipped just for a second, revealing the furious monster beneath. "What's wrong with you?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, meant only for her. He finally shot a dismissive, contemptuous glare at Declan. "Excuse me, were you bothering my wife?" Before Justin could make another move, Declan stepped smoothly forward, a subtle but absolute maneuver that placed him squarely between Rachel and her husband. He wasn't aggressive or threatening. He simply occupied the space, a human shield of quiet, unshakable resolve. He met Justin's glare not with a challenge, but with an expression of complete and utter disinterest, as if dismissing a mildly annoying insect. Mr. Murphy Declan said, his tone as flat and clinical as a legal deposition. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding. Your wife will not be leaving with you." Justin's jaw tightened, a vein pulsing in his temple. He tried to laugh, a harsh, grating sound that held no humor. "I don't know who the hell you think you are, but I suggest you walk away from my wife right now. Rachel, stop this foolishness. Let's go." He lunged for her again, a more aggressive move this time. But Frank materialized in his path, an immovable object. Frank said nothing. He did nothing but stand there, and it was enough. Justin's carefully constructed facade finally shattered, his face contorted with the narcissistic rage of a man whose authority had been publicly challenged. "You're making a scene, Rachel?" he snarled, his voice rising, drawing stares from people nearby. "Get a hold of yourself. Do you want me to call security on this man?" The hypocrisy was breathtaking. This was the moment. All the years of swallowed words, of silent screams, of meticulously hidden pain coalesced into a single point of cold, terrifying clarity. Rachel lifted her chin and met her husband's furious gaze. For the first time, he did not see the reflection of his own power in her eyes. He saw a stranger. "No, Justin," she said. Her voice was quiet, and it trembled, but it carried across the space between them with the force of a tectonic shift. "I am not going with you." "What did you just say to me?" he seethed, taking a step toward her, only to be subtly checked again by Frank's presence. It was Declan who answered. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He calmly took out his phone, his movements unhurried, as if he were merely checking the time. He dialed a number from memory. "Justin, I want you to listen very carefully," he said, his voice dropping to a conversational, almost bored tone that was more chilling than any shout. He held the phone so Justin could hear the ringing on the other end. "In about 30 seconds, your phone is going to ring. The caller will be Jonathan Carmichael, the head of M&A at Ethelred Capital. He's going to inform you that Apex Global Logistics has just invoked the change of control clause in our contract with Logicor Tech. The $900 million deal that you bet your entire career on is now officially dead." Justin's face, which had been flushed with rage, went stark white. He stared at Declan, his mind scrambling to process the information. Ethelred, Logicor, Apex Global. The names were right, but the context was impossible. Who are you?" he stammered. "My name is Declan Shaw," Declan replied, just as Justin's own phone began to shrill its cheerful ringtone, a sickening counterpoint to the unfolding disaster. "And you just destroyed your career because you couldn't keep your hands to yourself." Justin looked from Declan's cold, impassive face to Rachel's defiant one. He looked down at his ringing phone, the screen flashing with the name of his boss, the harbinger of his doom. The entire architecture of his life, his power, his reputation, his immense wealth was imploding in real time right here in the arrivals hall of JFK. The white rose fell from his limp hand and landed on the polished floor. He was no longer a titan of industry. He was just a small, violent man who had finally, irrevocably lost control. "You bitch!" He breathed the words aimed at Rachel, his last pathetic attempt to inflict pain. Frank Declan said calmly, ignoring the insult, "Please escort Rachel to the car." Frank nodded, placing a firm but gentle hand on Rachel's elbow, guiding her away from the scene of her husband's self-immolation. She didn't look back. She didn't need to see Justin's face as he answered the call that would end his world. She didn't need to witness the public humiliation of the man who had terrorized her in private for so long. As Frank led her through the automatic doors and into the crisp, cold night air, she took her first real breath of freedom. It was sharp and clean, and it burned in her lungs. A black sedan was waiting at the curb. The door opened for her, and as she slid inside, she left the noise, the lights, and the entire life she'd known behind on the pavement. The door closed with a solid final thud, sealing her in a cocoon of quiet safety. The car pulled away from the curb, and she watched the bright, chaotic terminal of JFK recede in the window, a monument to the war she had just won. The secure residence was an exhale, a long, shuddering breath Rachel hadn't realized she'd been holding for 6 years. It was a sleek, minimalist apartment on the 34th floor of a nameless glass tower overlooking the East River, furnished with an elegance that was both comfortable and completely impersonal. There were no memories here, no ghosts in the hallways. The silence was the most jarring part. It wasn't the tense, watchful silence of her life with Justin, a quiet that was merely the absence of shouting. This was a true, profound stillness, a space where she could finally hear her own thoughts. That first night she slept for 14 uninterrupted hours. It was a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind of restorative oblivion she hadn't experienced since before her wedding. She woke to the pale light of dawn filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and for a terrifying second, she didn't know where she was. Panic seized her as she reached for the other side of the king-sized bed, expecting to find Justin. The cold, empty sheets were a jolt that brought everything rushing back, the plane. Declan's offer, the confrontation at the airport. It was real. She was safe. She was free. She curled into a ball and wept, not from sadness, but from the sheer, crushing weight of her own relief. The next 24 hours passed in a surreal haze. Frank Declan's head of security had been clear and professional. "You are secure here," he'd said. "No one gets past the lobby without our authorization. Your old life cannot touch you." He'd given her a simple burner phone, its contact list containing only 2 names, Declan and Frank. A discreet delivery service provided everything she needed: soft, comfortable clothing, wholesome food, prenatal vitamins, a collection of classic novels. Declan was systematically dismantling every chain that tied her to Justin, every excuse she might have to reach out. He wasn't just hiding her. He was building a fortress around her, brick by silent brick. The next morning, 2 women arrived. They were announced by Frank and Rachel. Let them in, her heart pounding with a nervous rhythm. They were not the soft, pitying social workers she might have imagined. They were a force. Catherine Vale, the divorce attorney, was tall and severe, dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, her silver hair pulled back in a tight chignon. Her eyes were like chips of granite, missing nothing. Ana Cortez, the immigration lawyer, was younger, with a warm, intelligent face, but her gaze was just as focused, her presence radiating a calm, formidable competence. They sat not on the comfortable sofa, but at the stark glass dining table. It felt less like a therapy session and more like a war council. Rachel Catherine began her voice, crisp and devoid of sentiment. "We are here to help you, but for us to do that, you need to tell us everything. Do not edit. Do not protect him. Every threat, every shove, every single time he made you feel small or afraid. It is all ammunition." And so the story came pouring out. Hesitantly at first, then, in a flood, Rachel recounted the years of carefully hidden torment. She spoke of the verbal abuse that stripped her of her confidence, the financial control that left her feeling like a child, and the physical violence that had escalated from a tight grip on her arm to the bruised ribs she still felt with every deep breath. She pulled back the sleeve of her new sweater to reveal the fading, mottled bruise from the flight. Ana Cortez didn't flinch. She simply took a high-resolution photograph of it, with her phone, her expression grimly professional. "This is evidence," she said, her voice steadying. "Your pain is now evidence." For Rachel, that simple statement was a revelation. Her suffering was being transmuted from a source of shame into a weapon. For hours they dissected her life. Ana asked precise questions about her visa, about Justin's sponsorship, about any threats he'd made regarding her citizenship. Catherine, meanwhile, mapped out the financial labyrinth of their marriage, identifying assets and accounts with the focus of a forensic accountant. "Understand this," Catherine said, her gaze intense. "Justin will not see this as a marriage ending. Men like him, narcissists with immense public pride, see this as a loss of property. A prized possession has been stolen, and he will use every tool he has to get it back or destroy it. He will try to paint you as an unstable gold-digging immigrant. He will try to crush you. And that's why we will move faster and hit harder," Ana interjected smoothly. "We'll be filing for a U visa immediately based on you being a victim of a serious crime. We have the documented injuries, and we'll subpoena the police report from the incident 2 years ago, the one he convinced you to drop. We will file for an emergency protective order and for divorce simultaneously. We will build a wall of evidence so high and so thick that he will find it impossible to climb." While Rachel was building her fortress, Justin Murphy's empire was burning to the ground. The news of the Apex Logicor deal's collapse hit the financial wires like a thunderclap. In the ruthless world of high-stakes capital, it was the equivalent of a public execution. Jonathan Carmichael, Justin's boss, had him in his office before the markets even opened, his face purple with rage. The investigation was swift and brutal. Why had Declan Shaw, a man known for his icy pragmatism, pulled a contract worth nearly $1 billion? The official story was a failure of due diligence. But the real story, the true one, began to leak, spreading like poison through the city's financial veins. It was whispered over steak dinners in Midtown, texted between traders on the stock exchange floor. It started with an airport employee who witnessed the confrontation. It was corroborated by a flight attendant who had seen the tension in first class. The story wasn't about a bad deal. It was about Declan Shaw, CEO of Apex Global, personally intervening to rescue a man's abused pregnant wife from her own husband. The scandal was catastrophic. Justin's powerful friends, men who had clapped him on the back at galas, suddenly couldn't recall his name. His calls went to voicemail. His emails went unanswered. The board of Ethelred Capital, terrified of the reputational damage, moved to cauterize the wound. Justin was forced to take an indefinite leave of absence, his access to the company servers revoked before he even left the building. He tried to retaliate. His lawyers sent a barrage of threatening letters filled with accusations and demands. Catherine Vale's responses were masterpieces of legal destruction, each one calmly dismantling his claims and presenting irrefutable evidence to the contrary. When he tried to freeze their joint accounts, he discovered Catherine had already filed an injunction locking him out. One evening, a week after her arrival in New York, Rachel was watching the financial news, a quiet act of reclaiming a world from which she'd been excluded. Suddenly, Justin's face filled the screen. He was caught in a storm of camera flashes outside a downtown law office. His bespoke suit was rumpled, his perfect hair was a mess, and his face, once a mask of charming confidence, was contorted in a snarl of pure, impotent fury. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Disgraced VC. Titan. Justin Murphy faces abuse allegations amid career collapse." He was no longer the master of the universe. He was just another disgraced man, hounded and exposed. Rachel felt no glee, no triumphant satisfaction. There was only a profound, hollowed-out sense of release. The man on the screen was a stranger, a villain in a story that was finally over. The cage hadn't just been opened. It had been melted down to nothing, and she was at last truly, irrevocably free. 8 months later, the world outside was hushed by the first heavy snowfall of winter. From the window of her Brooklyn apartment, Rachel Payne watched the fat, lazy flakes drift down, blanketing the city in a clean white slate. In her arms, her daughter Sophie made a soft, cooing sound in her sleep. The apartment was quiet, filled only with the gentle rhythm of the baby's breathing and the distant, muffled sounds of the city. It was a peaceful silence, a stark contrast to the charged, watchful quiet she had once mistaken for peace in Justin's world. She gently kissed Sophie's forehead, inhaling the sweet, milky scent of her skin. This tiny, perfect human had never heard a raised voice, never felt the tremor of fear through her mother's body, never been a witness to a door slamming in rage. Her entire existence had been one of warmth, safety, and love. Every decision Rachel had made, every terrifying step she had taken, had led to this serene moment. It was the ultimate victory. Later that day, she bundled Sophie up and made her way to the bright, airy studio space a few blocks away. The words etched on the frosted glass door read Payne Designs. Inside the atmosphere was one of focused, creative energy. The scent of coffee and drafting paper filled the air. 2 young, brilliant architects she'd hired were bent over a large table, debating the load-bearing requirements for a new cantilevered roof. Seeing her vision coming to life, filled Rachel with a quiet pride that was entirely her own. This wasn't something Justin had given her. It was something she had built from the rubble. Her firm had just landed its first major contract, a community arts center in Queens. It was a challenging, meaningful project that demanded both innovation and heart. She spent the next few hours immersed in the blueprints, the familiar, precise language of lines and measurements, a soothing balm to her soul. She was no longer just a survivor, a victim, or a mother. She was an architect again. She was herself. Just after lunch, the door opened, bringing a gust of cold winter air. Declan Shaw stood on the threshold, his salt and pepper hair dusted with snow. He wore a simple wool coat, his cheeks flushed from the cold, and he looked more like a visiting professor than the CEO of a global logistics empire. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his eyes taking in the bustling studio with open admiration. "Declan." "You're right on time," Rachel smiled, walking over to greet him. "Welcome to the organized chaos." "It's incredible, Rachel," he said, his gaze sweeping over the models, the sketches pinned to the walls, and the focused energy of her small team. "You've built something real here." "I had a good blueprint," she replied, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She led him toward a quiet corner, where Sophie was asleep in her bassinet, sheltered from the drafts. "And a very good reason to build it strong." Declan's brisk, business-like demeanor seemed to melt away as he approached the sleeping child. He leaned over his large frame, seeming to soften his hands, clasped respectfully behind his back, as if afraid to disturb the profound peace of the moment. He didn't just glance. He truly looked, studying the tiny curve of Sophie's cheek, the flutter of her eyelashes against her skin. "She's beautiful, Rachel," he said, his voice a low murmur filled with a sincerity that went straight to her heart. "Just perfect." Rachel watched him, a wave of emotion so powerful it almost took her breath away. This man who had wielded his power with the precision of a surgeon to save a stranger was now humbled by the sight of a sleeping infant. He saw not a possession or a legacy, but a promise. He was the antithesis of Justin in every conceivable way. The divorce had been finalized 2 months ago. Stripped of his career and social standing, Justin had become a ghost in the city he once sought to conquer. He had put up a brief, sputtering fight full of impotent legal threats, but his power was gone. He'd settled signing away the apartment and agreeing to substantial alimony and child support in exchange for an NDA. Catherine Vale had called it what it was. He was buying her silence. But Rachel knew they had bought something far more valuable, her freedom and her future. Declan had remained a quiet, steady presence through it all. He was not a savior riding in to manage her life. He was a mentor, a benefactor, and most surprisingly, a true friend. The seed money for her firm had come with a simple contract that treated it as a straightforward investment in a promising startup. He never made her feel indebted. His weekly calls were brief and respectful, asking about Sophie or her latest design challenge. He had opened the door, but he had trusted her to walk through it and build her own world on the other side. "Thank you, Declan." Rachel said, her voice thick with an emotion she could finally express without fear. He turned from the bassinet to look at her, his blue eyes clear and direct. For what he asked, simply. "You're the one who did all the hard work." "No," she insisted, shaking her head. "You did more than just open a door. You tore down the entire prison. You didn't just save my life. You gave it back to me." He held her gaze for a long moment, the unspoken history of a desperate flight and a life-altering choice passing between them. He glanced from her determined face to the blueprints on her desk, then back again. A faint, genuine smile touched his lips. "You're the one who drew up the new plans, Rachel," he said softly. "And you're the one building it. That strength was always yours. You just needed a chance to use it." He was right. She saw that now. The woman in the cashmere sweater, the ghost of her past, had been strong all along. She had survived. But the woman standing here today was doing more than surviving. She was designing, creating, and thriving. Declan prepared to leave, offering a final, warm congratulations. As Rachel walked him to the door, she looked back at her studio, at her name on the wall, at her child sleeping peacefully, at the plans for a future she was creating with her own 2 hands. The snow had stopped falling, and the winter sun was breaking through the clouds, making the fresh blanket of white on the city streets glitter. It was no longer a blank slate of uncertainty. It was a clean white page waiting for her, and she had so much left to build. Rachel's story is a powerful testament to the fact that even in the darkest of situations, a single act of courage can change everything. It wasn't just Declan's power that shattered Justin's world. It was Rachel's decision to accept the lifeline, to step out of the shadows and reclaim her own life. Her journey reminds us that monsters often hide behind masks of success and charm, and their victims are silenced by fear and isolation. It also shows that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about taking action despite the fear. If this story of survival and empowerment resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support for survivors everywhere. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it, to let them know that help can come from the most unexpected places. And for more stories that inspire and remind us of the strength of the human spirit, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Thank you for listening.